What is going on YouTube? This is Acid Root. So I'm going to review the second solo album by Ozzy Osbourne. Basically, this album came out in the fall of 1981 and it's called Diary of a Madman. So Ozzy was establishing like a solo career for himself throughout the early 80s after kind of parting ways with Black Sabbath in the late 70s and just the 70s overall. That was a hit band that he had had throughout the 70s. And then he basically kind of competed with Black Sabbath throughout the 80s. Black Sabbath acquired Ronnie James Dio, who dropped an album called like Heaven and Hell or something like that in 1980 or early 1981. And he kind of competed with, I don't know if they directly competed like Coke and Pepsi and some of that type of stuff, but just to kind of say that Ozzy was kind of fleshing out like his career as far as that kind of went as well. And so basically, this is another hit album. This one's kind of noteworthy. I mean, it's noteworthy in a number of ways. But one of the reasons why it's noteworthy is because guitarist Randy Rhoads, this is the final project that he worked with Ozzy on. And he was the guitarist behind Ozzy's mammoth hit single, Crazy Train, and also Mr. Crowley. So he has a couple more singles with Ozzy on this particular project, so you at least get one more taste of what Ozzy was like from like the early 80s when they had those hit songs like Crazy Train. But basically, Randy Rhoads passed away in like a plane crash about 6 months after this album came out. So really, Randy Rhoads passed away about 6 months after this album came out, which just gave people a very faint taste of like the hits that Ozzy kind of had with the same valve as the stuff with Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley and some of that type of stuff. So it's a big unfortunate kind of situation. He was a hit guitarist. You know, folks had said that he was up there with Eddie Van Halen and some of those folks from like the 80s and stuff in the 70s. But I would have to say, like, I give this album a lot of credit. I'm actually going to give this album a higher score than I gave Blizzard of Ozz. I'm starting to kind of not remember that album as much, but I do at least remember the singles like Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley. But in comparison, I would have to say that I think the singles are not quite as damaging on this album as they were on, at least in terms of Crazy Train. In terms, like, I feel like that's pretty much one of Ozzy's signature songs is Crazy Train from 1980. But I would have to say there are three singles on Diary of a Madman, and at least one of the two, in my opinion, Over the Mountain hits harder than Mr. Crowley does from Blizzard of Ozz. But I would kind of say in terms of like overall notoriety and this overall like this kind of signature kind of appeal and that type stuff in terms of distinction, I would say that Crazy Train probably does still have a little bit of a height over the Mountain and Flying High Again. I mean, both these songs on here are pretty mammoth. They did a great job. It's not like they're bad songs, but I just don't hear them very much on like classic rock radio. And I think of that, most people, when you think of Ozzy nowadays, they just will turn to Iron Man, Mr. Crowley, or like Crazy Train, of course, which is just a continual classic rock highlight. But I just don't. Maybe it's just because I didn't notice the album as much, but I just would wonder if they would play like Over the Mountain. That would be the one that I would choose. It's the most popular song on this album, according to Spotify. Definite riveting kind of song. And then Flying High Again just really gave me some AC/DC. And then Flying High Again really gave me some AC/DC type vibes as far as that kind of went, just so with the overall hit potential. And just kind of like a more cresting, just kind of cruise control kind of song as far as that kind of went. But it's just kind of, yeah, I mean, the singles, it's a good batch. I like the fact that Randy Rhoads nailed these songs, but the riffs are just not quite as distinct as they were on like Blizzard of Ozz. And I think, you know, both Mr. Crowley and Crazy Train had like those distinct riffs that even if you barely knew rock music, you could probably be able to point out and say, oh, yeah, that's like Crazy Train, just in that sort of sheer craziness. There's not really like a shrieking kind of band. There's not really like a shrieking kind of banshee kind of spook of a song like Crazy Train, and there's not like an overall arena kind of highlight like Mr. Crowley. But this album is good. I'm going to give it a better score than I gave Blizzard of Ozz, but it's just a different variation that this is less kind of like a shrill and kind of like, I felt like Blizzard of Ozz was a lot more of a haunting kind of album. This one is just more of a metal one. Doesn't have like that ghostliness and kind of that kind of dark Prince of Darkness kind of atmosphere that Ozzy typically had like in the 70s and 80s and stuff. It just is not, it's more metal induced and a lot more kind of seemingly down to earth than what it kind of feels like compared to Blizzard of Ozz. That one was just a lot more haunting. But so to talk about the singles here, To talk about the singles here, Flying High Again is the first single, and this is a pretty hit song. I do like this one. It's just a back in the saddle kind of setting out kind of song. It just really feels like a lazy kind of simmering day, but it's a very robust tone about it. This kind of feels like one of those songs where maybe you're moving out of your house or something like that, or you got travel to do and you got some things to take care of and you're stepping out and getting stuff done. It's just kind of like a almost biz. I feel like the song, in terms of like the atmosphere of the day, it just feels like a lazy kind of June or July day, but still kind of has enough energy about it to kind of get stuff done and kind of realize that you got like some tasks to take care of, pay some bills, that type of stuff. Just get moved out, just kind of back in the saddle, riding out, that type of stuff. Just kind of an easy kind of car cruise song, just kind of setting out and getting some stuff done, just kind of back on the prowl, basically. I just think the concept, and it's an interesting song to kind of have this come from Ozzy as far as Flying High Again, just because Crazy Train did not have that kind of pitch. It just kind of really feels like not so much like First Romp, but just like, hey, you know, you're back in the field, like a homecoming kind of song, that type stuff as far as that kind of goes, just in that sort of pitch. Touching bass, some of those type things, just kind of in like a more summery kind of tune with this good sense of bustle as far as that kind of goes. I just like this one. It's a kind of a new valve. It's just a different angle from Ozzy, and plus he has Randy Rhoads along for the ride, so it's just kind of an interesting affair as them trying to establish more hits just that quickly as far as that kind of went. But it just doesn't have the overall sheer distinction of Crazy Train. I mean, in terms of it being like a lead single, I think it's a good back in the saddle kind of tune, but it just doesn't have the overall bite and overall this candid distinctability of some of those, some of the ones off Blizzard of Ozz. But Over the Mountain does. I feel like this is a definite, this one could contend with some of Ozzy's best, at least from what I've heard. I feel like this just has a real riveting kind of riff on here, just a real paced kind of metal bop. Over the Mountain's the second single, real paced kind of metal bop, just an easy kind of night venue hit, and has a good sense of energy, and it's just a very serene song. This one is about the closest thing to like kind of like a horrifying kind of ghostly kind of feel that Ozzy kind of gets. It just really has that shriekish kind of feel towards it, but it just is more of a metal song. I mean, I feel like this is about like I said, this album's not quite as haunting, but this is just kind of like a metal song that needed. This one is just like the meat and potatoes kind of metal cut. I feel like when you're looking for something, we're Flying High Again is just kind of more of like a touching bass, this kind of lazy day, and just kind of in a more bustling kind of way, I would suppose. But this one's kind of more like the standard song that I think probably would have torn up radio throughout the early 80s and that type of stuff. I think this is probably the one that was like the Crazy Train of the album. It competes with it. It's not quite as distinct. I think the riffs and the overall energy of Crazy Train is still better, but it's definitely better than Mr. Crowley. I'd probably say it's better than Flying High Again. It's obviously, it's in my opinion, it's better than Flying High Again. But this is just another killer type song from Ozzy Osbourne, just really that quickly. So it's just an overall good one. Definitely should be on an Ozzy Osbourne Greatest Hits album. I think it could definitely stand to be on there. I don't know how well this song charted, but this has a real riveting kind of quick paced kind of song. One of the most energized kind of songs on here, and just kind of has like a real kind of crazy kind of energy about it. So it's just a good one. The third single is Tonight, and this one doesn't have like a lot of like, this one doesn't have a Wikipedia article about it. So I think this is probably like the late third single that was just kind of like an afterthought that just kind of happened. If it got airplay, good. If it didn't, oh well, kind of atmosphere. This one's definitely kind of like a ballad. It's just very much a softcore, kind of more homely, kind of pseudo ballad. It's a ladies track, but it just kind of has like an overcast feeling with some disdain on there. It just kind of feels like in a regretful kind of atmosphere about it. It's very like the riffs are just so soft, and it kind of feels like You Shook Me All Night Long by AC/DC, that kind of vibe, where it just kind of has a more relaxed and just kind of homely feel towards this. Not really like a metal and night venue kind of tune as much as it is this kind of softcore rock as far as that kind of goes. It's the closest thing at the time that I would have seen Ozzy as far as trying to cross over to like pop rock territory. So it's just a good one, but it's just a very kind of more benevolent kind of rock tune from Ozzy. And it just shows a different side for him to kind of have a lot more just softcore kind of vibes as far as that kind of goes. But I don't know how well this song charted. It didn't seem like it charted that high, but at least was an attempt to get there. So it's just a good varietized angle from Ozzy after the two more riveting riffs that he had on here. So that's just kind of the thing. There's 8 songs on this album, and out of those 8, I wound up recommending to you 6. Of the 2 songs I didn't recommend, would just be You Can't Kill Rock and Roll and Diary of a Madman, the title track. Now, both of these kind of have like a more, like You Can't Kill Rock and Roll has a more kind of arena rock, kind of arena ballad, kind of journey type feel towards that. I just didn't appreciate that one, mainly because it's about 7 minutes. It's just kind of a lengthier song than what I would have wanted. But if you're definitely looking for like a Wave Your Lighters in the Sky, just kind of like journey, kind of festival, outdoor festival kind of tune, and just in terms of being out in the heat and that type of stuff, that is a good one, but I just didn't vibe with it as much. And Diary of a Madman's kind of another one that's just kind of a lot more of like a more sluggish, not necessarily down tempo, but just kind of more like relaxed and just kind of sloth like kind of tune that just didn't have good enough riffs or kind of traction that I was really looking for. But that's about the only 2 songs on here. I feel like a lot of these, like if you're looking for another song like Over the Mountain, a song I do recommend would be Sato. Yeah, Sato is just a real riveting, quicker jam. It's just a nice party cut, and it's very similar to Over the Mountain. Just has a jivey kind of feel towards it, and it's just a nice dance jam. There's not a ton of songs I can think of that could create dancing in terms of Ozzy music. It's not to say he doesn't have dance tunes, but this is definitely one that feels more of like a jivey kind of bop on here, just to kind of get the ladies dancing, some of that type stuff. Just a riveting, kind of more quick pace kind of party cut. I just really feel like this is definitely a party cut. This one and Over the Mountain are like a good 1-2 punch for kind of having that angles. I do recommend Sato. It's just a nice one. Probably one of the, most of these songs on here are kind of lengthy. These songs are kind of more just kind of sprawling kind of tunes that there's just not many crafted for single type radio songs like Over the Mountain and Flying High again. But to talk about a few of these, like Little Dolls is kind of, Lil Dolls is like a stellar kind of hangout jam. Definitely good for like a hot kind of daytime fanfare type atmosphere. It has enough energy for night bops also, but I definitely see it as more of like daytime type energy, daytime commute, just hangouts for that sort of session. Definite good for like 1 o'clock, 2 o'clock, 3 o'clock in the afternoon when it's pretty searingly hot. Just good for a good mellow summer day, something like that. It's real nice, just overall hangout kind of jam. Another one that's pretty good on here is Believer. This one's definitely more of like a simmering kind of night venue cut. I feel like a lot of this album does have some summer bops on here. It just really feels good for like the kind of summer energy. It's a little bit more summer oriented than Blizzard of Ozz, where these just kind of feel like more of like simmering days. This is kind of like a good companion piece with like AC/DC's Back in Black and some of those type records. This one just feels a lot more, it just has these simmering kind of cuts. Believer is definitely kind of a simmering night venue cut, just for something kind of a more relaxed night out. It's just, it doesn't have like the crazy kind of shredding riffs on here as far as like some of the album does, but I feel like when you go out and about and kind of relax at like the booth or something like that, sip a beer and just kind of notice the surroundings and some of those type moments, is a good cut, just with kind of some nice comfortable energy, and it's just an easy overall social jam. Really has that kind of fanfare about it as far as that kind of goes. I would have to say it's probably, I mean, some of these, like this album is so brief, just the way the albums kind of were in the early 80s. You just kind of get like a quick and snappy kind of feel, where some of these do kind of have like night out kind of feels towards it, but it's not. Yeah, because this is such a brief and compact album, you kind of get your hangout jams. If you don't like that particular hangout jam, then that's just one less one that you have that kind of slashes like the quality of it. But luckily I did like 3/4 of this project. I just would have to say Believer's a real nice night venue cut. Sato's a party jam. Little Dolls is like a good daytime hangout session. Over the Mountain's like a good party riff and just overall kind of shredding kind of energy. Great single, competes with Crazy Train. And then Flying High again is like a back in the saddle kind of bustling kind of day type tune that just gets you back in your old ways as far as that kind of goes. So it's just good to kind of get some of those. So me liking 6 out of 8 on this album, I'm going to go ahead and give this album like a 9 out of 10. Like I said, I like this better than Blizzard of Ozz. It felt like it hit heavier, definitely had some more good vibes on here. I think both of these would be a great 1-2 punch, getting Blizzard of Ozz and Diary of a Madman, but somehow I felt like the vibes on this album are more contemporary, and I'm not for 100% certain just because it's been since March since I've listened to Blizzard of Ozz, but I would have to say Blizzard of Ozz had hits, but it just was kind of more testing the waters and trying out things and seeing what works and that type of stuff. But really the only thing this album truly lacks in terms of competing, and the only reason why I would think people would like Blizzard of Ozz more, is just because it just does not have that classic rock mammoth, just gargoyle like Crazy Train. That's just the only thing about it is just there's not a riff as distinct as that on this project. Even with Randy Rhoads in tow, which he does deliver on this project, but this doesn't have the distinction. If you would have said to me that if I wouldn't have known that Randy Rhoads is on this album, I probably wouldn't have even known the difference between him and some other cat that replaced him once he was gone. This kind of thing is just not as distinct as compared to saying, oh, well, there's Crazy Train if you know Randy Rhoads and Ozzy, but then to sit there and say, well, what other song would you say apart from Crazy Train and Mr. Crowley that are definitive to him? I think Over the Mountain is definitely one that I feel like can do that, but this doesn't have the sheer bite of Crazy Train, but it is good. I mean, I would definitely give, in terms of song quality, I'd probably say Over the Mountain to me is like a 10 out of 10 in terms of quality. It's worth buying the album for, despite the fact there's only 8 songs on here, but I definitely feel like the singles are good, but they just are a different breed and just interesting because it just feels like Randy Rhoads really only did like Blizzard of Ozz and that was it. But he did both these albums. It's just kind of I just question the concept of it just surely didn't have that bite. But I just look at it, I give this album the higher score because I do like Over the Mountain. I do feel like there's plenty of quality on here. So 9 out of 10. The social score I will give like a 9 out of 10 also because there's 6 out of 8 songs. Like I feel like all the singles work. They all have their valve as far as that kind of goes. Tonight's a good song for the ladies. Just kind of relaxing, benevolent. It's kind of a relaxing, benevolent kind of vibe. Flying High Again is a back in the saddle kind of. Flying High Again is a back in the saddle, old ways kind of song. This is good for returning to form. And then Over the Mountains, kind of a song that just has like the classic kind of metal type feel of the early 80s, just with Metallica and Black Sabbath and some of them and AC/DC. Just good vibes. So it's just good to kind of get that. And then there's some other good stepping out kind of cuts and just overall party vibes. So 9 out of 10 score. In terms of like the future, like Ozzy has dropped a couple albums in the 2020s decade. I want to say he dropped an album in 2020 and possibly 2022, something like that. Somewhere around this time, he's dropped a couple projects. I want to kind of see what some of those are about, but I do want to review more 80s Ozzy as well, so we'll have to get to that. But yeah, just to really say, the only real reason why this album didn't get a 10 is just because the two kind of more ballad-esque and kind of sluggish tempo that just kind of threw the velocity of it off just a little bit. But apart from that, 9 out of 10 across the board, social and regular score. So yeah, this album kicks ass. I'm gonna have to check out some more Ozzy and such. So